Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. Cassin, your host here, National Cannabis News, and thank you Stacy for joining us today. I'm so glad that we get to chat. I know we chat a lot, and I'm glad that other people can hear what that chat sounds like. Hopefully they will be able to hear you. I have had like serious difficulties with doing collaborative streaming in the past, so I hope we get someone that will tell us that they can hear you. Not a problem on the stream. Feel free to say hello.
Thank you for having me, and hopefully you can hear me and everybody can hear me, and we will, go off without a hitch.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds good to me. Okay, guys, just so you guys know, we're going to go through the normal things that we usually cover. We're going to talk about cannabis busts around the nation and the world, what's going on in the United States, which is an ever-evolving thing. I cannot believe that we still talk about this every week because there's always cannabis news and what's happening on Capitol Hill. We're going to talk about new things in cannabis science. Super excited to talk about a new longitudinal study dealing with cannabis use during pregnancy, which I know there are many people out there that are interested to hear about, as well as what the heck is going on in Michigan. And thank you so much, Stacy, for being here to talk to me about that, because what is happening? Michigan, what in the world?
Seriously.
Right? Like
there's a lot going on. It's chaos.
Yeah, it's chaos. I like that term. Before we do that, let's go ahead and focus on cannabis bust. As every week we talk about this, we talk about the fact that you may think that cannabis is legal where you are, but there are still people being put in prison every day around this country, every week around this country for this plant. It's important for us to remember those people. It's important for us to remember the over 30,000 people that are still serving time, some of them serving life sentences for this plant. Some of them who have been in prison for longer than a decade already for this plant, while we are enjoying the plant, having purchased it, if you're in Michigan, very cheaply, and of high quality as well, right? Like these are real issues. There's a lot of organizations in Michigan. There's a lot of organizations around the country that are actively working to get people out of prison. I'm glad to work with them. I'm hopeful that I'll get some of them on the show sometime soon to talk to everyone else. But the truth is this is still happening. It's happening a lot. Last year was almost 250,000 people put in prison, arrested, and imprisoned for cannabis in our country. That's last year. Now, it's better than it was 20 years ago when it was about 1 million people a year going to prison for cannabis. But still, think about that. That's a large percentage of all the people that are in prison in the United States that went to prison last year also went to prison for cannabis, which most of us think is legal. And not only do we think that it's legal, but we might be able to, buy it on Facebook. So when we think about these kinds of things and we think about the consequences for everyone, it's good for us to go out of our way to remember them and also to vote accordingly for people who are going to work towards making sure that people are freed and that nobody else goes to prison for this plan. I think that's important. That's why we start at the top of the hour every time with this subject. Stacy, if you are working with any organizations that do this kind of work, please share. And if not, that's okay. I will go right into talking about the people who were busted this past week.
Well, I definitely want to give a shout out. So I'm working with the Kalamazoo Social Equity Cannabis Chamber right now, with Rebecca Collette from Collexium, and we just got connected with an amazing organization called Steps to Victory. I don't believe that they do a ton with expungement, but they really concentrate on reentry, which is another huge aspect of what the war on drugs and bringing people back into communities, and what that looks like as far as being able to get a job, being able to support yourself, being able to, do you have a family that all of a sudden now you have to support a family again? Like, how the hell do you do that when you have not just something on your record, but you're transitioning to a whole different life again? So shout out to Steps to Victory. They're going to be doing a lot of good stuff for the holidays. So if you're in the Kalamazoo area, hit them up.
Oh, that's great. See, this is why I asked, because I knew that you would be doing it. All right. So,
you know what's up.
Big things, guys. I know we've covered over the last 2 months a lot of busts that have been happening in New York. Amazingly, the courts in New York have recently decided that some of these busts were not constitutional, and that they shouldn't have been chaining up things and arresting employees at these facilities, especially where employees thought that they were working for licensed facilities, but they didn't really know, those kinds of things. There were a lot of people arrested. tens of millions of dollars of marijuana products and cannabis products throughout New York were seized and destroyed, even from operators where the police had not proven that they weren't actually a licensed operator. Well, I know it seems kind of crazy, but that's what the courts decided. Not only that, but they decided that what the sheriff had done was against the rules. Oh, hey, Drake Detroit, thank you. It's nice to see. It's that. Stacey, I don't know if you can see this on the Twitch stream, but Drake Detroit just posted a goat with like super flashy holographic sunglasses. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I get excited when people are typing to me, and this is a new meme. I think it's cute. It's emoticon. It's fabulous. Okay, so in what I was saying was they found that the sheriff should not be able to do this, and they definitely found that he didn't have due cause, and also that in some cases they went to places and arrested everybody who was present without actually even finding any cannabis. They just claimed there was cannabis, and they also arrested people claiming that they were selling cannabis when no sales had been made, right? So
how does that work?
You know, in New York, they're just like, we have to find a way to shut down all these unlicensed operators, regardless of their civil rights, and let's go forth and do great things, you know? And if we didn't have courts that were interested in listening, they would just keep doing this, you know? It's kind of like the DEA for the last 50 years saying that there's no medicinal use for cannabis, when clearly there is, right? Like, there always was, right? So, I mean, they can get away with a lot, and in this case, there's a checks and balances, and I'm glad to see that checks and balances are being used. I wish that it wasn't the case, but that's why we have this at the top of the segment. You know, people are still arrested in Michigan for cannabis and go to prison in Michigan for cannabis in a state that's been legal since 2008. It's
Very
not like
so.
new, right? And there are prosecutors who are trying to find any reason. You know, we just last week we had another court case that said, hey, actually, even though MRTMA, which is one of our bills to allow adult use sales here in Michigan, says that you can't go to prison for the plant anymore, all you're going to get is a fine and at most a misdemeanor, which might lead to probation, maybe. The courts have decided, well, that's not actually what the voters meant, which I think is crazy, since if you ask the voters, of course, what they meant was that nobody should go to prison for this plant. Even the people who don't want to be in the licensed market, even the random guy selling on the corner, even your barber, your neighbor, your uncle, yourself, nobody should be going to prison for the plant. But prosecutors are finding a way around that. Judges are agreeing with them. And until we make cannabis not Schedule I in the Michigan CSA, you know, they have legs to stand on. You know, there's been bills, you know, the last 4 or 5 years in the state legislature trying to change that, right? This is just one example of what's going on in New York, where even the police aren't following the rules, which I know it's kind of cliche, but also the police are not following the rules, and the courts are siding with the unlicensed cannabis operators, or the allegedly unlicensed cannabis operators in this case. I feel like this is important. New York is a new state for this. They've had a lot of issues rolling out, and that just comes back to this idea of creating a prohibitionist mindset, because legislators, regulators, and police officers, etc., think that they're the ones that need to do this, but really it's a relationship between farmers and consumers. And if they would just get out of the way, we probably would be able to self-regulate. They haven't gotten out of the way in over 50 years, and that's why we're not able to self-regulate. Okay. Considering on that, I think maybe, Stacey, you're aware of the Customs and Border Patrol seizing materials in New Mexico, and now operators in New Mexico are suing the government. That may actually make it to the Supreme Court. There's been a lot of statements about, well, Customs and Border Patrol doesn't do it anywhere else. And I feel like this week is a perfect example of that actually they do it all the time. It's just the people in New Mexico are loud about it, right? So just this past week, 2 cannabis operators had a couple 100 pounds seized at the airport by Customs and Border Patrol. Now, the police are saying...
What airport?
It was the airport in Philadelphia Airport, right?
Okay.
So up north, not in New Mexico or anywhere else in the Southwest where people think of Customs and Border Patrol as being present. But in this case, there's Customs and Border Patrol leaving Philadelphia, and they claim that these 2 women were leaving Philadelphia with all of this weed and on their way to export it to the United Kingdom. I don't know if they were or not. I think it's crazy now that the United States has such cheap and readily available cannabis that people are packing it in to export to the rest of the world. We used to be a net importer of these substances. Now we're a net exporter. What has happened to the world? In this case, Pennsylvania is a legal state. So these women might have thought that it's okay for them to, like, I don't know, drive around with big bags of weed in their luggage.
Well, it's not like the flower. You can't like vape or you can't smoke flower in Pennsylvania. It's like Florida. So there's that though too. And ask me how I know. If you want to know, ask me how I know. Found out.
Tell us how you know.
Real quick, last September, I decided to go out to Western Pennsylvania, just for a couple nights, out to a national park or state park rather. And I had my bowl with me. I had my little hike. I ended up seeing something kind of suspicious, and I ended up talking to a ranger about it. The ranger pivots and says, I smell cannabis on you. And I had my card with me. So I'm like, I'm a patient. I'm a legal patient in Michigan, yada, yada, yada. I give it to him. He was very disappointed to find out I was not lying to him. At that point in time, he goes, well, just so you know, you can't smoke it here. You can go find your edibles. You can go get your vape, but you can't smoke flower here. So, find another way to consume your medicine. And that was that. Thank God I had my card and it worked. And, I didn't lie. But anyway.
Yeah, no, it was good. It's good. And see, park ranger could have decided that you need to be arrested that day because you were consuming medicine, because the rules are unclear, because differences in states, because one kind of cannabis is less legal than another kind of cannabis.
Right.
As though, smoking the good herb is bad in some way. It's not, but
here we are.
Police continue to think that it is, and there are people that agree with them in the legislature, right?
Regulators.
So these women were arrested with possession with intent to sell, and in this case, possession with intent to export. And, it's just one more example of where, people are traveling and they have these products on them. And I mean, I don't know how much they had on them, but unless it was like, I don't know, like a metric ton of weed, if you're just carrying a personal amount with you, you're probably not intending to sell. Although you could probably make more than it cost you to buy it in the States. Like, that's probably not your intention, right? This continues not just in this place, but we also saw Customs and Border Patrol activity in California along the border as well with cannabis. Again, because they have 100 miles of the border where they can stop people, and they started stopping buses again. This was something they were doing about 4 or 5 years ago, but in this case, people are on the bus, just regular citizens riding a bus, getting pulled over by Customs and Border Patrol, probably because they think maybe there are some people that are on the bus that shouldn't be there, having their personal effects gone through because they're on a bus, and then having their cannabis seized. Most of the time they're also doing this with drug dogs and such, right? So there are some other searches and things are happening. These aren't happening at the border. They're happening off the border, right? If you look at the Customs and Border Patrol website, they actually are pretty proud about all the seizures that happen at the border and inside the border. They post it on a weekly basis, so you can look with pictures of everything that they see.
And they're so lame.
Yeah, it's a thing. So it does happen. Somebody asked me the other day, well, would it ever happen in Michigan? Could it ever happen in Michigan? Yes, we are near the border. We are within 100 miles of the border. Most of our state is within 100 miles of the border.
Most of the state can be like controlled by the Border Patrol.
Yeah, I think it's just like you have to be super far southwest, like basically Chicago, to not be within 100 miles of the border. So it's a little crazy, guys. Which means, yes, they could do this to you. They could put up a checkpoint and take your weed if they wanted. And Customs and Border Patrol has seized thousands of pounds of cannabis in Michigan in the past year. Why don't we talk about that, right? This is just, law enforcement, are they seizing it? Now, I'm glad that they're not arresting a bunch of people. They are letting people go, but they are seizing citizens' assets. And then my understanding is then they give it to the DEA. And get this, what does the DEA do with it? Any idea?
No.
They sell it to cannabis researchers.
Wait a minute.
For $2,000 a pound. You think I'm kidding? So now if you want to do research, you're either going to get it from the University of Mississippi or you're going to get it from the DEA, which includes products that have been seized.
Products that have been seized that are okay, so that have been bought on the market, that is like purchased product. Okay, so it's probably the likelihood that it's old, that it's remediated. I mean, that it could possibly be sprayed with terpenes and pesticides, all these different, that is mind blowing. I mean, and then what are they going to do with that though, right? Like, is that, I mean, if they're going to release that data to researchers in order to, like, I don't know, make this industry better, awesome, maybe. But also, I feel like that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like,
Wow.
you know, having to buy all of your research weed to the National Institute of Drug Abuse via the DEA is a little crazy.
That's insane.
But yeah, and they also have big bonfires and stuff. But I found it to be really interesting that was a method. And if you look at the research that's being done, that's being sanctioned, they'll even have a record of where it was seized and who it was seized, like who it was seized from, if it was a company or an entity, which, you know, seized from you and me by Customs and Border Patrol, and then now it's in a research program at the University of Wisconsin. Who knows? So that's definitely happening. Another part that I wanted to mention to you guys, you know, California has been doubling and tripling down on trying to shut down unlicensed operators for a while now. Happened again this past week. You know, and in this case, I kid you not, the arresting police officer said they had arrested a homeless person with cannabis, which they believed he was possessing with the intent to sell without a license. Because, you know, the random homeless people with cannabis on them in California are the people that are a menace to society. What is going on, California? What is going on? Drake Detroit is saying they were arrested in a national park for a personal amount of cannabis. The national park rangers are feds. They do not recognize med cards. I have mentioned this as well. So are TSA agents.
State park. So right. National park.
You were in a state park. But yeah, but national parks are no bueno. All of Washington, D.C. I mean, I know they're illegal, but are they? Like, they will be not kind to you. They have a very large amount of people who get arrested for cannabis in Washington, D.C., the surrounding areas. It's an ongoing thing. Not as much as, say, Texas, okay? But still a lot. More than should be arrested. Something else that I found to be really interesting. So Canada is federally legal, okay? And they have a well-regulated market. Their market is robust because of the robustness. It's pretty cheap to buy cannabis from the marketplace in Canada. They also continue to have a medical program, which can allow you to do like crazy things like grow at home, right? That program's existed for a while. And people have, you know, gone from Canada to the United States many times. Something people may not know is that they still have licensure for most production of most things in Canada. And just like tobacco is contraband in Canada, so is unsanctioned, untaxed cannabis. So this past week in Canada, they arrested an organized crime ring who was selling cannabis edibles, cannabis pre-rolls, and tobacco cigarettes without going through the license system. And they said that they did this because it was a public health concern, because they could not guarantee that these products had been created in a safe way. Which, you know, they even said that they felt like where the products were being made was in unsanitary conditions. And that's why they had to arrest people.
Okay, and can we talk about the sanitary conditions in licensed facilities?
I mean, we could. I feel like they haven't been in any of these places. You know, I wanted to ask, they didn't have a hand washing sink? Were there not enough single-use paper towels available to dry one's hands? Right, like, I'm starting to think that police go out and they're like, oh, yeah, you definitely shouldn't consume these. And they put out a public health notice. They were like, if you have anything that looks like this, don't consume it because it was created in unsanitary conditions. Have they not been in a restaurant in New York? Right? Like, I mean,
there you go.
Or okay. New Orleans? I'm Chicago? I'm just saying, I'm not entirely sure they understand what they mean when they say unsanitary conditions and a public health concern. But I do know what they mean when they say contraband, because what they mean is that the person didn't pay taxes in order to be able to sell the thing. And that included tobacco products and cannabis products, right? So, now we've come full circle. People are like, I don't want to have to pay taxes to sell these cigarettes or these marijuana cigarettes or these medibles. And I'm not gonna. And the government comes down and says, now you're going to jail because of tax evasion. That's how we know we've come full circle, I think, right? It's like, what it was, Al Capone getting arrested because he didn't pay taxes? Didn't matter, he'd murdered dozens of people. No! Didn't pay the taxes, now you're going to jail, right? So that's definitely happening there. I feel like it's important for us to consider this. Right now, the DEA is considering rescheduling still. What would rescheduling look like? Are we looking at where people are still going to go to prison for this plant because they're not getting a public health survey of their kitchen? Are we going to be able to grow at our own homes? Are we going to be able to share with our friends and neighbors? Are we going to be able to go to farmers markets and sell these products? Recently in California, Governor Newsom could have signed into law that, home growers and small growers could sell at farmers markets instead of having to sell through a distributor that then has to sell to retail operators. And, the legislator voted and said, yep, everything's good. Went to the governor's desk and the governor said, nope. So now these small growers have to go pay another person who has to have a license to take their cannabis, repackage it, and then sell it to another person who has a license before it can get to a consumer. So now we don't have locally grown, know your farmer, community-supported agriculture in the cannabis industry, which we had before adult use took over in California, right? It was something that you do with the medical market, the way things were written with the original proposition there. So it's messy how these things happen. It's messy that they still arresting people, again, arresting homeless people in California for intent to distribute cannabis, which, probably we have a lot better things to do with our policing dollars, but who am I to be like, could we, I don't know, focus on rapes and murders? We could, but no. We've decided that the priorities are still the war on drugs in most places across the country, even in places with decriminalization. All right. Speaking of that, okay, if we kind of put a hat in that, we have like a few days to go. I feel like, Stacey, you said that you were doing voting earlier today. I have a plan to go vote on election day. I usually bring cupcakes and such to my election workers because I know their job sucks. They don't get paid much. We have, an update from the Harris campaign. I don't know if you follow this stuff, but I'm like a crazy policy wonk, so I do. So the Harris campaign actually came out and said not just rescheduling, but federal legalization with a 4 to 5 year plan for what that should look like, and pointing to 2 different bills that had previously been presented in the Senate and one in the House as well. So that was really nice to see. It's different than just saying, yes, I think weed is cool. It's, yes, I think weed is cool. Federal legalization should be the case. And if you dig a little bit more, both of the bills include expungement for people who were previously convicted. And they appear to also include things for what they're calling nonviolent offenders, which I still don't really know what that means. Does it just mean you were arrested without a gun? Or a violent offender would be someone arrested with a gun? Because I feel like if you had like murdered someone for weed, that maybe is different than if you were just selling weed. So I'm a little unclear on that, but that was included in these policy positions.
I might, don't completely quote me on this, but I think I remember when it comes to the nonviolent, which is one of the issues with some of these bills, or at least some of the issues that were posed, is that they say nonviolent, but what oftentimes happens is when you're arrested for some kind of cannabis, there's some kind of violent charge along with it. So like, resisting arrest or in possession of a firearm or something like that. So then you're automatically like, oh, sorry, can't get expunged.
Yeah.
So it really depends if they found something in the facility or on your person or whatever it is. Yep. There's a way to block people from being able to.
I feel it. I got rid of all the guns from my household when I decided to join the industry, because I was like, look, if they're going to come and decide to arrest me for taking care of my wife, and making sure she had access to medicine. I don't want them to also arrest me for like committing a felony with a weapon. You know, it just adds like an additional 5 years to your sentence randomly, right? And I shouldn't have to, by the way. It's a ridiculous rule, but that was what was necessary. So that was what was done. You know, I would love that they changed that. And I know that right now the Supreme Court is looking at something to do that, which who knows what our Supreme Court will decide. They asked the most recent Supreme Court case on cannabis. They asked the most unlikely questions. I think everyone who was listening was confused. And maybe that's a good thing, right? They're going to do something unexpected and perhaps make give people more rights than they expect. Who knows? It's also worth noting that even though the Harris campaign has come out and said these things for the last 2 weeks, and former President Trump is pretty good at responding pretty quickly and saying what his positions are, he has not shared any updates on cannabis since he came out in favor of adult legalization in Florida. He has continued, however, at his rallies to say that drug dealers should be capitally punished and shot by police on site. I'm still a little confused by if he includes all drug dealers or just the drug dealers he doesn't like, but he hasn't made any actual policy statements about this, so we don't really know what that means. But we do know there is a stark contrast, a policy that has been defined and is clear versus a policy that has not been defined. I feel like that's important. The next item here, I'm super excited to say that the organization I've been a part of for almost a decade now, the National Cannabis Industry Association, has been tapped to talk at the DEA hearing on rescheduling, which was supposed to be on December 2nd, but is now, because of a judge, okay, this is not the DEA doing this is a judge responsible for the hearing, has deciding that it will not happen in December. They're going to have a preliminary hearing to collect more information for the courts. They are concerned that the people that have been selected by the DEA may not actually be representative. They want to know if they are for or against the changes. There's a bunch of like normal things that you would have expected the DEA to say, like this person is for, or this person is against, and but they didn't. The judge also seemed to be concerned about conflicts of interest. So now it's been pushed out. They have proposed new dates in January and February. So, you know, we were hoping that this hearing would happen and be completed before whoever is going to be president next year would be president. But now we know that is not the case. And I feel like that is important because our voices are being heard today under the Biden administration because the Biden administration has requested that they are heard. There is no guarantee that a new administration that is not a Biden-Harris related administration would continue that policy, and it's possible that they would just stop it altogether. Nobody actually knows, again, because there's been no policy statements made by former President Trump on this issue. So I feel like that's important. I know, Stacey, you've gone with me to Washington, D.C. before and talked to all these people who are out there making decisions about our lives when they have no idea about cannabis, usually.
Yeah.
And, you know, I would love if you could share what your experience is. I tell people here all the time about what it's like for me to go to D.C. What about you? What's it like talking to your representatives?
You know, I've only been in DC once lobbying, and you know that was with you last year, and that was definitely a huge experience. Being able to be in DC, you know, see all of the people that are making the changes and making these rules and regulations around our lives is like a little bit overwhelming at first, but you know, being able to speak to my representatives here in the state of Michigan, you know, that's really, I don't want to say practice because it's really important. But, you know, the conversation can be quite different, you know, at the federal level than at the state level. And if you have any experience with speaking with any kind of regulator or legislator about cannabis, you will realize that they really don't know shit. And like for real, don't know shit. And that is another major hurdle that is, because they're not just dealing with cannabis, they're dealing with everything that comes along with whatever is under their jurisdiction, which is everything, just everything, right?
Yeah.
So, what is very big in our lives and in a lot of people's lives isn't necessarily on their radar. So when you're starting from scratch, and you kind of have to start from scratch a lot and over and over and over again.
Every year, almost.
Yeah, it's, it's real interesting. But honestly, to circle back and answer your question, in DC was kind of like the lift and the eye opener that I needed to realize where I needed to pivot my concentration and my focus, and what the focus really needs to be on for, workers in the industry, and the medicinal aspect of cannabis as well. We still have a long way to go, but hopefully if we vote the right people in that are listening to the people, really listening to the people, it's important for anybody that's listening or watching. Please get involved. An email is like, it really can go a really long way.
Yes,
it's not as difficult as you think, and if you think somebody else is handling it, they're not. Yep. There's like 3 people that are like, oh God. So, your voice really matters. It really, really, really matters. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I know it does, because when I do the work, they reach out, right? They ask questions, they ask follow-ups, they want you to come in. And if they already had all the information, or if they already had a dozen other people like reaching out to them, would they be reaching out to me, random person in Michigan? Right? No. Right? Okay, so maybe I'm not random. I've been doing this for since 1997. I'm
not
educated.
You're not random, dude.
Right? Yeah. I'm in the industry. I do the show. I go every 6 months to DC. I'm very active. Okay. And also, these people don't know me when I walk into their office, because they've just been elected. Right? I don't have an established relationship with them when I meet them the first time. Right? They may or may not know who I am, even if I bring a resume with me. Right? So there is that policy of showing up, because if it's not me and it's not you, it's nobody, is real. The more we actually show up, a good example of this is the rescheduling item that happened. 40,000 people submitted comments. Okay. For net neutrality, it was 2.1 million. Okay. So the difference wasn't people going to prison, wasn't access to medicine. It was, can Time Warner Cable, throttle your internet if you want to watch Netflix, but not if you want to use Amazon, right? That was what it was about. And millions of people wrote. Tens of thousands of people wrote about cannabis, even though we have, 30 million registered patients, even though we think we have 1.2 million cannabis workers, right? 40,000 of all of those people decided. So less than 1% of the people that we know are registered to do this work showed up for themselves with these comments, right? Oh, hey, Brandy, first time chatter. Thank you for sharing all about this link that I don't know where it goes to, but it's beautiful. It looks like something at the Hill, which is a policy publication, guys, from DC. And Brandy Z Detroit says phone calls make a difference too. Ding up for action alerts and make those calls. Yeah, for sure. I think sign up for action alerts and make those calls. For sure, there are organizations out there, National Cannabis Industry Association, Americans for Safe Access, NORML, that will 100% show up for you and then tell you when to show up when a call to action is needed, and phone calls are needed, and emails are needed, and fundraising are needed, and patients are needed to show up at a hearing. I don't think I saw Americans for Safe Access on the DEA rescheduling hearing list, which definitely made me sad. And we should look into that, Brandy, if we haven't already. All right. So moving off of what's going on in Capitol Hill, we've got a couple of more items here. So I don't know if you track what's happening in all the states, but most states that have licensed programs now have a statement that says on the side of the box, package, label, whatever, pregnant women don't use this product because it's going to cause harm to babies. And we haven't really had a lot of research that clearly says that with longitudinal studies. But one of those studies came out in the Journal of American Medical Association's Pediatrics magazine on Wednesday. And it said that actually there are some effects during pregnancy from this. Oh, perfect. Is that what that is? Brandy Detroit has shared with us that ACE's founder Steph Shearer wrote an op-ed on the Hill about the power of Congress to make the change that they need to make. That is there's a link to that in the chat right now, guys, if you want to check it out. It's there, and it will also be a link in the video for later download for anybody who's watching it later. The chat is always available that way. So in this longitudinal study, almost 300 pregnant women were followed for about 15 years, and they reported whether or not they consumed cannabis during pregnancy. I was not able to see how much they used during pregnancy, so that wasn't included. But what was included was looking at their children 5 years later after birth, so 5-year-olds, and comparing them to mothers that were in the same study who did not report using cannabis or did not test positive for cannabis use during the trial. And in this study, what they found was that the 5-year-olds were neurodivergent. Which is important in my household because we have there's a lot of neurodivergence in my household, right? We got an autistic person, we got another autistic person, my kid is autistic, there's autism everywhere, right? And so we talk a lot about executive function, we talk about impulse control, we talk about stimming, all these kinds of things. And what they found was that in youth, while they didn't find any other cognitive issues, what they found was that there was a slightly higher prevalence for struggling with executive function control, right? Which might lead to things like ADHD, right? Hey, you feel me, right? We've heard about executive function. Now, some people are really great at it, some people are terrible at it. But what this study showed, for the first time, I might add, was that in children there was a statistical difference between the children of mothers who had consumed cannabis during pregnancies and mothers who had not, which was all other things equal, right? So weren't no problems with intelligence or speech or any of those kinds of things. It was executive functioning and impulse control, where they found that the 5-year-olds, couldn't sit still for quite as long, and couldn't plan quite as well. And I think that that's great news. I think for a long time they've been saying, oh, no, babies, they're just going to come out like they've, alcohol babies. And that is not the case, right? And I felt like it was great news. This is something that we can think about, we can look at. And there's an opportunity here for us to build on this research and say, okay, well, now let's look at, hey, Brandy, thank you so much for the follow. I appreciate that greatly. What we can say now is, hey, here's this research that said this happens. Let's see if this happens with a small amount of usage or a large amount of usage. Is there a difference between A and B, right? Because it matters, right? If there are a lot of moms and pregnant women that are out there that consume cannabis for a lot of things that happen during pregnancy, especially nausea, right? Where they might want to be having these products. There's a lot of moms that are out there that have other kids and they just need to sleep and they're using cannabis, right? And what does that look like? Something else that was noted, there were all of these women that were reviewed were in a single program, and that single program that they were in was mostly for people who are impoverished, right? So the real question then becomes is if the mom is not impoverished and she has access to all the other things that she would need, is there still a difference? And I feel like that's important because sometimes, people who don't have the money for everything don't get the same prenatal care, right? And there are other environmental exposures that happen. And I feel like that's important to discuss as the next step of research. And this is why I love, and when I say I mean it, I love the fact that we have the MMR. I love that we have more research that can happen. I love that these things are able to be funded by an now. And I'm super glad to see this kind of stuff. Like, I'm sad because, okay, there is something that could potentially be wrong with babies for the first time, because it's been, they've said this for years, but there's never actually been any evidence that was the case. I see you like nodding and smiling and like, share your thoughts. This is the science for the week.
Right. So my question is, the source of the cannabis being used in the studies. that matters because, is it an edible? Is it being processed through your liver? Is it distillate? Is it one cannabinoid? Is it all cannabinoids? How is it being consumed? Is it full flower? Is it like, where did you get it from? Is it the DEAC stuff that's 6 years fucking old that might be sprayed with terps and,
exactly
with diamonds?
Right.
And those things factor in. They really do. What is on the plant, how it's grown, what it's grown in, all of those things carry over to what those effects can be long term. I'm not a doctor, right? But the people I talk to that are real professionals, those are the questions that are asked and posed. And it's not all that hard to think that there's other things that are coming along with, commercially manufactured cannabis products.
Yeah, no, of course. And in this study, they did not have any of that differentiation. So all the women were in Ohio. All the women were at the same children's hospital. They all agreed to be in the study. They all agreed to self-report. They all agreed to testing during their pregnancy. They all agreed to follow-up visits in the first year and the 5 years of their child's life, right? The people who were evaluating the kids at year 1 and year 5 were not aware of whether or not the mother had consumed cannabis. So it was a blind trial, which was something that's new. Usually that is not the case in other studies that have happened, right? So there could have been bias there. And they did have a pretty, broad demographic, right? The women were between the ages of 16 and 50. So pregnant women of all ages.
Wow.
They had people of lots of different races. The one thing that they really all seemed to have in common was poverty, right? Besides that they were pregnant women in the United States, right? So that was there. And I really feel like, this study just came out. There's so much more that can be done after this. Was it edibles? I think that's a wonderful question. Is this is first or second pass liver thing, right? Because those metabolites are different in your body. And I feel like that's important. Brandy, I love this. I'm so glad someone else said this. I was going to say it myself, but I don't really think, Brandy says, I don't really think being neurodivergent is a bad thing. How many of these mothers are neurodivergent? Is this nature or nurture? I think this is a wonderful thing. There was nothing at all in the data that was presented that said whether or not the mothers were already neurodivergent. It would be nice to kind of divide that up as well. Because we do know that there are genetic links at this point, right? So if you have an autistic mom, it's very likely that you will also be an autistic kid. It's like a 50-50 chance, which is kind of huge, right? Same thing, if you have an autistic sibling, it's like a 40% chance that the other one, that you're both gonna be autistic, right? So these things are important. We could ask those questions. The questions weren't asked, but that's the point of doing the research, right? Now that we have this one data point, we can say, what more questions can we ask? Can we ask flower? Can we ask edibles? Can we ask 10 milligrams? Can we ask 100 milligrams? Can we ask through the first trimester or the third trimester? Those things matter. That kind of research is done for all other kind of drugs out there. We have been limited to the kind of research we could do with cannabis because it wasn't allowed. Because of the MMR, we can do this research. Rescheduling, descheduling, doing the research even better. We'll have more information to be able to make good decisions, right? Because the difference between I'm gonna be diabetic because I don't have access to my cannabis, which I know is crazy, but there's another study in Colorado that says if you're consuming cannabis, it helps stabilize your diabetes, right? Which for pregnant moms could be important if you're having gestational diabetes, right? Or, if it's helping with your nausea, if it's helping with your pain, if it's helping with your sleep, all of the things that it helps people with all the time for reasons why people use it. I guess what, guys? You could be taking benzodiazepines for sleep. Those also impact babies, right? So being able to look at it from that perspective, instead of just looking at it, oh my gosh, this is an illicit substance that you shouldn't be using while you're pregnant. That's a better conversation. One of the reasons I was really excited to see this come out, because they were not bastardizing these mothers at all, right? It was very much look at these moms, look at how they were doing it, look at how successful their babies are. And I say look at how successful their babies are because there was an expectation that the babies would not be successful. And across almost all items, they were the same as all babies, right? And at 5 years old, that's saying a lot, right? It was just these two items that were different. And they even say as much in the study. They come right out and say, yeah, the basic cognitive functions of both sets of babies were the same, which is huge. Because, they've been saying that it causes developmental issues and makes babies stupid for decades, which is now we have another study that says clearly that is not the case. So super, super glad about that. All right, so now on to the last part, right? Okay, I know, Stacey, thank you so much for bearing with me through all these other items and adding your wisdom to the conversation. Okay, so guys, we still don't have draft rules in Michigan, but we do have a crazy story that happened here. It's kind of taken the industry, especially cannabis workers, by surprise. In this case, what we have seen, it was reported that 305 Farms had been robbed. And then a day later, the general manager of 305 Farms said, no, this was not a robbery. This was actually me making licensed legal sales in the state of Michigan to licensed operators and paying my employees their back pay, which they had wages that had been stolen from them by the owner of the company. When I saw it, I was like, when I saw it and I saw what the owner had to say, because what we first said was, it would be not before all the other crazy darkness came out. He was just like, well, we found a bunch of this weed in the metric system. And I was like, you mean a thief came to your facility, got in metric, wrote a manifest, called a secure transporter, and shipped it somewhere? What are you talking? Nobody is gonna do that.
Right? It was fucking ludicrous.
It was insane.
Ludicrous.
But then we find out that exactly what I thought had happened before we found out more information about it is what happened, which is that someone who was responsible for the facility sold the weed to licensed operators. And guess what? That person and the owner just disagree on what was supposed to happen with the weed. And in this case, the workers that are there that received the payments that they hadn't been receiving for a long time, some of whom who had been working without pay for a long time, some of whom who were suing their employer for not being paid for a long time, had talked about the fact that they didn't have money for food, that they were running soup kitchens at the facilities so that they would get to eat at least once a day. So I guess they'd have enough calories to keep turning out the widgets. I mean, it's crazy when you think about this, and the violence that was threatened to them by the owner of the company. Like, it is beyond me how workers, like the two of us, can put up with this kind of insanity. And this is the kind of stuff that happens all day, every day in our industry. Whether it's somebody saying that you have to clock out and they still make you work, or they decide that the overtime that you worked, you're not going to get paid, or they said, oh, we're going to pay you $16.50 an hour and you get to keep your tips. And then they decide that you don't get to keep your tips because they didn't make enough money that week, and so they're going to take the tips out of your tip jar and put it in the till. I mean,
it's illegal.
All of these things are illegal.
Illegal, yeah.
Okay? It's one of those things where it's like, you see these owners, they come down and it's not just this. It's not just about workers. You see, they're mad because, like, I don't know, somebody has a sign that they don't like and they're complaining. They want them to be fined or arrested. It's a lot of things where they want more enforcement, but only against anybody that isn't them. Right? So here we are being sued for not paying your workers, being sued for wage theft, and then calling your manager a thief because he pays your workers, which he's required to do by law. I mean, just insanity. So, Stacey, you work with a lot of workers groups. You do this work all the time. I know that I have experienced this. Let's talk a little bit more about what this looks like and how we can work together, workers and workers, to solve this problem.
Right. I mean, this whole thing is, there were workers from 305 Farms that had been talking about this on Reddit for a while, for several months, up till like 8 months ago. Like, so there was two sets of workers. There was the ones that you're reading about in the current Metro Times, right? But there was a whole separate crew that like left. that were like, fuck this. There's 14 of them that together sued 305 Farms, which, as far as the article states, I believe that was settled out of court. But this is about what's happening right now. The fact that this Jan Verloor, this owner, insisted that they needed to go to the police, is using your taxpayer dollars for their own bullshit. Because that's what this is. This is bullshit. So workers, the first set of workers, they did the right thing by at least going to a lawyer. Now from, trolling around on Reddit and seeing what some workers and stuff were talking about on there, they not just have, that lawsuit that was going on, but there's also NLRB charges, wage and hour complaints. There's other people that weren't paid too. It wasn't just the workers. I know we're going to be talking, and we're talking mainly about the workers, but this was like an overall, like, fuck you to everybody. And that's a fuck you to the community in the state of Michigan.
Right. Vendors, pesticide appliers, pest management companies, soil providers, nutrient providers, mechanical HVAC providers, because it's not just people who actually touch the plant that are impacted by our industry. For every one worker, there's 4 non-cannabis workers that have jobs supporting our industry, whether it's, electrical, landscaping, transport companies, gas stations, diners feeding workers down the street from the processing facility. Whatever it happens, all those things are there.
Right.
And when I think about it, and I think about all the things that people were talking about, to me, it just comes back to this idea that, we're all told as workers by managers not to talk about this stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And that's their MO. They're absolutely. Like, workers, no, don't talk to each other, because if you do, you will find out that we have fucked you.
Right. And that is, so I was in hospitality for almost 20 years prior to being, on the license side of the cannabis industry. And the amount of times that I was, reprimanded for sticking up for my coworkers. And there was always one line. It didn't matter where I worked over those years. There was always the same thing that was always reiterated. You need to worry about yourself. Why don't you just worry about yourself? You need to just worry about you. And that is bullshit. And that is part of the game, right? That's part of taking away your ability to exercise your rights.
Yep.
You have the right to talk to your coworkers.
Yep.
You have the right to talk to your coworkers about pay. That is false. If they tell you not to talk about pay, that you shouldn't be doing that, because you absolutely have the right to do that. So it's for workers right now, and this isn't just the cannabis industry. This is everywhere. This is every worker out there. We really need to know what our rights are, because there are very few of them, and they're very fragile. And the rights that we do have right now are, depending on how our administration goes and just the way that society and politics and everything is shaping out to be, they're crumbling pretty fast. And unless we as workers get a hold of them and preserve them and uplift them and strengthen them, you don't really realize what's coming, because you don't realize the things that are being prevented from being done to you. Right. It's, the history of labor is something that I never really thought I would be so interested in. But when you realize just how our society is completely, developed around labor, everything is around labor. Everything, the first thing you learn in school is they ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? There's doctors and firefighters and policemen, but what's not on that list? Happy, right? Happy. There's healthy. No choice to be happy, right?
No,
they want you to be something.
No
labor,
healthy, right?
Happy, healthy, right? Like any of those things that isn't brought up. It's what do you want to be as a laborer? So when you think that this doesn't affect you. It absolutely does.
Mm-hmm.
And for workers in the cannabis industry, the way that I see it is that we have the beginning of a new industry. And there's already other industries. Like when I was in hospitality before COVID and everything, I was really planning on doing what I'm doing now for cannabis for the bar industry. And, really knowing what I know now is that it's not to say that it's impossible, but it's really ingrained as fuck. And once something is there and it's, part of the thing and it's part of the fabric of the thing, it's really, really difficult to change. So right now is the time to stand up for yourself and your coworkers in the workplace and come together, whether it be unionizing or whatever your choice may be. Come together and come together collectively and talk about how you can make a change.
Yeah.
Because also, let's not forget that there are managers that are in the cannabis industry that are not necessarily bad people.
Oh yeah.
That they are roped in just like everybody else is. Some of them were trimmers, and within 3 months, all of a sudden they're a general fucking manager. And it's because the turnover is high. And, they were the ones that were showing up and staying late and taking less pay and taking the most amount of abuse and keeping their mouths shut. And they're also going to be the first ones that are fighting for you and realizing that, you know what, they don't have the control that you think that they have. So, be kind and be gentle to one another and realize that we all are trying to battle the same thing, which is respect. In the workplace. Sure. You deserve to be respected, and you deserve dignity. Yeah. And one of the hardest things that I, a hard pill to swallow was realizing that one of the most difficult things to do when people are experiencing trauma and, really bad things happening within the workplace is reminding them and teaching them that they are worth fighting for. And so many people are taught that within the workplace, down, like you are subservient, right? Like you don't have a voice here. And that really affects people's self-worth.
Yeah, it does.
And
even if you're a manager, speaking as a cannabis executive, having had boards be like, wow, you guys just suck at everything you're doing, knowing that you're pulling 90-hour weeks and working yourself as hard as you possibly can and trying to protect the people that work for you at the same time. Like that it's all the time. It's at all levels, the idea of overwork, even to the point of where, not being able to use the perks that come with, the extra stress of being a manager, being put in unsafe situations, being like, hey, you're gonna work here by yourself when that's against the rules and you should never be working somewhere by yourself, and you're going to be the one counting the money, and you're going to be doing the deposits. We're not going to use secure transfer to that. There's just lots of things that happen at those levels.
And that's just retail. Yeah, right?
That's just retail. And beyond that, right? I mean, I know we've talked a lot about worker safety. In this case, in this specific issue, there were threats being made by an owner. Let's be real. There are rules that say you can't make those kinds of threats in the workplace. It's really hard to fire the owner, clearly, right?
Right. And what are the repercussions?
Right.
What are the penalties?
And there should be some, right? Like threatening to kill your workforce is a big deal. And I feel like it's important. OSHA came out just this past week and they said that only 15% of cannabis workers receive any safety or emergency procedure training. 15%.
Yeah.
And that over almost 40% of workers were in hazardous situations but had received zero training on the hazard that they were being exposed to. So in most places, if you were outside of the industry and you're in a well-running corporation, you're going to get training that says, violence and threats of violence like that, those don't get to happen, right? And you're going to have ways to handle that. But in our industry, we're so new that, there's no board to go to remove the CEO in most of these companies, right? It's just one owner. And so then you're really having to look at what can the law enforcement do? And then you don't want to talk to law enforcement because you're in the cannabis industry, right? So, that they know that they can get away for that. Oh, Brady, yeah. I love it. I agree. The CRA needs to create a worker hotline. I know that there is a complaint hotline. Yeah. Anybody who doesn't know that this is the case, this is the case. If you are a worker and you are seeing your boss do things that are against the rules and they're against the rules, there is an anonymous hotline. You can leave it there. They will come. They will do an investigation. They will do the investigation within a week. They have to complete the investigation and have a report submitted, I think, within 90 days. It's a huge thing. It's fast. There are a lot of people that are out there that are putting in false complaints all the goddamn time. It's okay for you to put a real complaint in. Do not feel bad about this. If the motherfucker can be like, oh, I saw him selling weed out the back door and lie, because they do, competitors against each other, you can turn in a real complaint. It's not snitching. It's not ratting. It's literally like, hey, I'm being forced to do illegal things that I could get in trouble for later. Please help me, right? If you are a worker and you are in an unsafe situation, if you are a worker and you did not receive training on emergency solutions, on hazard communication, on lockout, tagout, on how you can handle personal protective equipment at your facility and what kind you're going to use and how you're going to store it and where it's going to get cleaned and how much you can use it. Those are things that are required at every single job. It doesn't matter if you're in retail, doesn't matter if you're a farmer, doesn't matter if you're a processor, doesn't matter if you're a driver. All of them require these same basic things. All you have to do is call them and say, hey, can you help me? And they will come in. And they will help your employer figure out that they are not doing it correctly. Right now in Michigan, just like in Colorado, they are consulting, right? You call them, they come in, they help, they fix the problem. They bring you SOPs, they help you with training, right? You don't follow those SOPs, you don't provide the training to your employees, and they're going to come back in 6 months and give you a fine, right? So the programs are there. They're there for workers. They're there because workers have said, hey, we're getting hurt, right? Workers are dying. Workers are being injured. A worker in Colorado died last year because he fell off a platform.
There is so much, there's that Reddit, which is like, oh, hey, OSHA, or whatever the hell it is. Like, and it's just, that is all, like the cannabis industry, there's all these things that they're supposed to abide by, right? But like the self-policing isn't happening. The actual policing isn't really happening in the way that it should. The consequences for not following these rules aren't what they should be. You know what they end up being? The worker is the one holding the bag. The consequences to the rules not being followed are workers getting sick, workers dying. And guess what? If workers are getting sick from whether it be mold or pesticides or all the plethora of different things that go wrong in a controlled environment that no longer is under any kind of control, that carries over to the consumer. Yeah. And this is a consumer safety and health issue that needs to be treated as such, because a problem with in the workplace becomes problem with the product. And right now, there's no remediation labeling. Nobody, like your general customer doesn't realize that they have completely kind of taken almost like the farm to table aspect, right? We're so used to just going to the store and picking up our meat and not realizing where it comes from. However, society and some people are becoming more conscious about that. You need to be the same way about cannabis. Just because it's a new industry doesn't mean that it's done right. It's been done very wrong. And the cart has been put before the horse. And the people that are seeing it and are seeing the problems firsthand are the people working in the industry. It will be the consumer, okay, that is going to be having issues. And they already are. We're just not, if you are consuming gummies all the time, right, and you're consuming, I don't know, hash rosin gummies or whatever, distillate gummies, and they're taking product that's covered in mold, it doesn't get rid of the mold, okay? It concentrates it down. There's a lot of things that are happening here that people are having reactions to, and we're not maybe putting the pieces together, and we don't have any research on it, right? Yeah. Who knows if these things are happening or not, but we need research on it before we're like, here you go. Yeah. Just here you go.
And hey, consumers, if you're out there and you're listening and you're consuming a lot or a little, and you're experiencing something and you're like, I never experienced this before with cannabis, you may be experiencing an adverse reaction. Guess what? The CRA has a hotline for that too. You can report the serious reaction, even if it's minor, okay? Adverse reaction includes, I got dry mouth, and I don't usually. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true, okay? Adverse reaction is, wow, I ate these gummies. Usually I eat gummies, and I'm fine, but I ate these gummies, and they gave me the poos, okay? That's an adverse event. These are reactions that you can have that have made you sick because you consumed something, you know? How did they find out about, you know, was it, listeria in Boar's Head, okay? Because people got sick, they went to the hospital, they said, I ate some ham. Okay, like how did they? What was it recently? E. coli on a quarter pounders, right? And they're like, it's not in the beef, it's in the onions, right? Like, guys, these systems exist for a reason. We have them in cannabis in the state of Michigan. You can use those here too. They're not in every licensed marketplace across the country, but they are here. OSHA hotline. We've got the CRA complaint hotline for illegal activity. We've got the CRA adverse event hotline for consumers that are out there, right? That you turn this information in, it's going to start an investigation. It might find something simple like, hey, they were remediating, okay, which I think Stacy and I disagree on, like the methods of remediation and its effectiveness.
We do, but that's okay.
It happens.
It's a great disagree.
And maybe the remediation equipment wasn't working as intended, and the testing is not as representative as it should be, and so really we were having too many pyrogens, too many dead or microorganism bodies left behind that was then going to edibles and people were eating, and it was causing them to have a fever, and they didn't know why they were having a fever. Well, it can be caused by pyrogens, which come from the dead bodies of microorganisms, which come from remediated weed, right? If you're not filtering that stuff out, it's still present, then consumers are consuming it. You know, if you're talking millions of colony forming units being remediated and not thousands, it's a big difference. Right? And so those kinds of things can happen. You get sick, you feel weird, you're eating this. Hey, turn it in. Now, I know there's a lot of people like, hey, I don't want to. Why do we turn this stuff in? We turn this stuff in because the data is used for research development purposes, right? They're going to say, hey, is everybody having this? Are we seeing a spike in the data? They're doing forensic analysis of everything that's being submitted now. They're using it to make risk-based decisions. They've told us that they're using it for this. If we don't give them any data, they're not going to be able to do the forensic analysis, and they're not going to be able to come like the FDA would, right? The FDA has MedWatch, just like we have Adverse Event Watch on the CRA hotline, right? So those things are there. Brandy has shared with us a great guide from Americans for Safe Access that talks about what's in your cannabis. The link is in the chat. I absolutely love this document. It is very clear. It covers a lot of things, and it has good references. So if you have additional questions, you can dig deeper. If you're like me and you want to know why, it doesn't just tell you. It also tells you why. It tells you how to get more information, which is great. Well, Stacey, we're coming up. We're past 5. This is amazing. We usually do an Ask Me Anything, guys. I'm gonna give like less than 5 minutes. You have a question, put it in the chat. Stacey and I will answer it. If not, man, Stacey, time for final thoughts. What are you thinking after being on the show today that you want to share with the viewers?
Well, I'm glad that you're doing this. Having a level-headed, person like yourself to be able to translate what is going on in our industry and some of the most important parts is really crucial right now. So I appreciate you for that. And thank you for having me on. My final thoughts here are, a big shout out to any of the workers at 305 Farms. Y'all didn't deserve this. You didn't deserve it at all. And I really hope that, between the GoFundMe and, all the support that is hopefully coming out of this, unfortunate event is going to help turn things around for you guys. And to all workers in the cannabis industry and just workers in general, but specifically cannabis industry right now, talk to your coworkers, even the ones that you might not get along with.
Right.
At the end of the day, like, you guys will likely have a bunch of shit that you agree on within the workplace and things that need to change and can get better. Mm-hmm. And if you've been in the industry for a while, or, you have experience and that things can get better and, things can be done better, come together with your coworkers and start talking about it.
Yeah.
That is literally that's the first step, and don't stop talking about it. Talking about it is really really, really important, because nobody's going to know what you're experiencing unless you speak up and, you have your voice. And while you have it, you need to use it, because the ability for it to be taken away is very real.
It definitely is. It definitely is. I feel that.
And know your rights and visit cannabisworkersresource.com. Duh. Go to my website.
Go to your website.
Learn more about your rights.
Gerhard Butler, thank you for the follow. I appreciate that. I'm just going to take it out with my final thought on this, just to follow up with what Stacy said. 100% owners are going to make decisions based on their best interest every single time. And if they're not, their business is probably going to fail. That means they might not be thinking about your best interest, right? Even if they're telling you that they are, right? So by talking to each other, by talking to your mentors, by talking to your friends, by talking to your trade organizations, by talking to your local unions, right? You can have conversations with other workers and get other perspectives to help make better decisions, including things like, hey, what kind of safety protocols do you guys have, right? It doesn't have to be all about pay. It can be about the kind of breaks that you can get. It can be about, the kind of integrated pest management that you're using in your cultivation facility, right? Sharing that knowledge is really important. And I know there's a lot of this whole, all of these things are proprietary in cannabis. But I will tell you, having been here for like 12 years, I haven't seen anything fancy or proprietary in most places, even holding patents now for the industry. Okay, even those patents, I was like, okay, we're making a little tweak here or there, but is this really different than the prior art? Those kinds of things where everybody wants you to be secretive. Know that something is wrong if they're trying to tell you that you should keep secrets from the guy standing next to you. Know that you shouldn't have to keep secrets about safety, and you definitely shouldn't have to keep secrets about whether or not you're being paid. If one worker isn't being paid, or if one worker is shorted 3 or 4 hours, or a half an hour across 3 weeks, right? Like, an hour and a half across 3 weeks, probably all workers are, right? And you maybe are diligent and you've looked and you've noticed. But other people might not have looked. Maybe they don't have time. Maybe they've got 3 jobs and 4 kids and the world's coming to an end and they haven't even looked at their pay stub. Jesus, how are they? They've already spent it. They spent it 2 weeks before they earned it, which exists now, right? Like, you can get a loan against your future pay, right? Those things are important. Even the small conversations. Even something as simple as, hey, my manager was really not nice to me. What do you do? How do you get the manager to be nice to you, right? And sharing that kind of knowledge. Is super important. It's important to share across companies, across departments, right? Across teams, across shifts. And the more we share, the more we're transparent with each other, the safer we're going to be, the safer our wages will be, the safer our rights will be, the safer our physical bodies will be, because we've shared best practices and we've made sure that everybody knows, right? I know I've been in plenty of places where first shift was trained, but second shift, who trained them? No one, right? So all those things are important. Thank you so much, Stacey, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody who came on the stream and commented. Thank you, Brandy. Thank you, Gerhard Butler. Thank you, Drake Detroit. I am so glad that you guys were here for this conversation today. I look forward to seeing you guys next week. I'm super hopeful. It has not been confirmed yet, but I think we're going to be talking to the Great Lakes Expungement Network next week about people after they get out of jail, how you get those records expunged so that you can, I don't know, have access to housing, student loans, appropriate childcare, credit, right? Like, there are so many things that having a record prevents you from doing, and expungement is a real thing in the state of Michigan. So, and there are organizations that will help you do this, including Glenn, and do this for free at no cost to you to get you through the system. I'm super hopeful that they will be here. If not, they will be here in the coming weeks. Thank you so much, guys. I hope that you enjoy the Halloween and that you have a super awesome weekend. Thank you so much, Stacey, and we're going out.